Hi team, and welcome back to our Introduction to Ancient Egypt series of printables and mini lessons. In our last lesson, we began to explore a key moment in Egyptian history, when the story stopped being about Egypt by itself, with its pharaohs building pyramids along the Nile, but became about Egypt as an empire colliding with other empires. Once that happened, everything changed, and not in a good way. In today's mini lesson, we will talk about the culture that first conquered Egypt and controlled it for centuries. That culture is known as Mesopotamia. Most people don't know what that is, because Mesopotamia is not as famous as Egypt, but it is just as ancient. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. Like Egypt, Mesopotamia was a river valley civilization. The only difference is that there were two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, running side by side. Along these rivers, the ancient civilizations of Sumer and Akkad were the first to rise, but we know almost nothing about them. The first famous civilization in this region was Babylonia. One of the stories about Babylonia that many people know is the story of the Tower of Babel from the Bible. Babel is the Hebrew name for Babylon. This was a city in ancient Babylonia where everyone spoke the same language and where there was a great ziggurat. The ziggurats are the massive structures that the Babylonians built that were probably as impressive as the pyramids in their time, but are only in ruins today because they were constructed of bricks rather than limestone, like the pyramids. Probably the most famous ziggurat, or something like it, housed the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Although, like the ziggurats, there is nothing left of them. What does remain of ancient Babylon is the story of a great king named Hammurabi. He is known for the Code of Hammurabi, which has the famous line, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." The Code of Hammurabi is preserved on an ancient stele, or stone slab. If you want, you can learn about the laws of Hammurabi online. There are many resources for that. If you decide to do that, what you'll learn is that the most common punishment for crimes in ancient times was death. Reading the Code of Hammurabi is a great way to see how difficult life was in early times. As fascinating as ancient Babylonia was, that culture of Mesopotamia and Egypt did not have an important relationship. They were separated by a huge desert. But as the Egyptian empire grew, it started to have contact with people who conquered the Babylonians, the Assyrians. They are responsible for destroying the Hittites that Egypt had already been fighting against, and that we learned about in the last lesson about the Battle of Kadesh. The Assyrians were the greatest warrior culture of ancient times, at least before the Spartans of Greece came along. The Assyrians set their sights on Egypt as well, and they conquered it around 664 BC. The exact date is not particularly important, but what matters is what happened after. As we can see from this inscription, Egypt started to be ruled by others. This set of inscriptions is not in hieroglyphics. It is in the form of writing used in Mesopotamia, as in the Code of Hammurabi. It is called cuneiform. This shows how Egypt was becoming part of the wider world. It was getting caught up in events involving other cultures. Which is why, when the Assyrians themselves were defeated by an alliance of other kingdoms, Egypt was dragged into the fighting too. This was terrible for Egypt, but for us in modern times, it's actually helpful. If you remember from the last mini lesson, it's actually really important to have different versions of a story in order to figure out what really happened. The people of Mesopotamia had many languages and versions of history of their own. And, which is lucky for us, they also had a kind of Rosetta Stone. It's called the Behistun inscription, which had 3 forms of writing on it, describing the reign of an important king, just like the Rosetta Stone. By far, the most important of these new empires was the Persian Empire. It came out of what is Iran today, but it quickly took over Mesopotamia and ancient Israel, and then conquered Egypt. It became the largest empire in the history of the world up to that point, reaching from India in the east all the way to Greece in the west. After this time, Egypt was always ruled by someone else. It was never an independent culture again. But one thing is very interesting about the Persians. Instead of forcing the people they conquered to abandon their gods and change their religion to suit the Persians, they did it the other way around. They allowed the people they conquered to keep their religion and even became a part of it. Here, for instance, we see a Persian pharaoh worshipping the Egyptian sacred bull. As we will see in the next mini-lesson, the next people to conquer Egypt learned this lesson from the Persians and also became pharaohs. More on that next time.